A diesel-electric submarine slipped beneath the surface of the Philippine Sea in the spring of 2006. No announcement, no tracking signal, no transponder ping that any escort in the strike group could catch. 6 days later it surfaced, inside the screen, less than 5 nautical miles from the USS Kitty Hawk. Close enough that the crew could read the hull numbers on the carrier's escorts through a periscope. The submarine was Chinese, the carrier was American, and for the better part of a week the most powerful naval formation on Earth had no idea it was being followed. This is not a story about one incident. It is a study in the geometry of detection, the physics of sound underwater, and the doctrine gap that opened between the United States Navy and the diesel-electric submarines spreading across the Indo-Pacific. The Kitty Hawk incident was not an anomaly, it was a data point. And the question it raised has not been fully answered since. How does a quiet submarine penetrate a carrier strike group screen without being detected? And more precisely, what does it mean for American power projection when the answer is more often than the headlines suggest? Hold that question, because the geometry of the answer is more counterintuitive than most strategic analysis admits. The carrier is not the target, the screen is, and the screen has a gap built into it by physics, not by doctrine failure. We will map that gap. X-51. The screen and its logic. A carrier strike group is not simply a ship. It is a layered defensive architecture built around a single principle, that no threat should reach the carrier without passing through multiple detection systems, each operating on a different physical principle, each covering a different range band. The outermost layer is airborne. An E-2D Advanced Hawkeye airborne early warning aircraft typically operates 150 to 200 nautical miles ahead of the formation. Its rotating radar dome sweeping surface and low-altitude air contacts at a range of roughly 350 nautical miles for aircraft, shorter for surface ships. The E-2D is the formation's long-range eye. It tells the strike group what is on the surface and what is moving in the air before those contacts can threaten the carrier. Below that, surface combatants. Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers and, in some formations, Ticonderoga-class cruisers, arranged in a dispersed screen at roughly 20 to 50 nautical miles from the carrier depending on the threat environment. Each Burke carries ANSQS-53C hull-mounted sonar and can tow ANSQR-19 passive arrays. They listen downward as well as sweep outward. Below the surface layer, an attack submarine, typically a Virginia-class or Los Angeles-class SSN, operating ahead of and beneath the formation. The SSN is both a hunter and a tripwire. Its passive sonar is the formation's deepest and most sensitive acoustic sensor, designed to pick up contacts before they reach the screen. On paper, this layered architecture should make a penetration nearly impossible. The question is the gap between layers, the acoustic dead zone where a diesel-electric submarine, running on batteries at near zero speed, emits less noise than the ambient ocean. Here is what most briefings do not say plainly. A modern diesel-electric submarine running silent on electric motors at 2 to 3 knots generates a radiated noise level that approaches the thermal noise floor of the ocean itself. Hull-mounted sonar, designed to operate against the acoustic signatures of nuclear submarines with their continuously running reactors and cooling pumps, is poorly matched to this target. The quiet diesel is a different problem from the fast nuclear boat, and the 2006 incident in the Philippine Sea proved it. Personal pH raise. 1. I spent considerable time going through the open-source reporting on the Kitty Hawk incident, and one detail kept coming up in every account. The Yuan-class submarine surfaced not because it was detected, but because it chose to. That choice tells you everything about what the crew believed they had demonstrated. The Yuan-class, NATO designation Song, is a Chinese domestically produced diesel-electric submarine displacing roughly 2,250 tons submerged. It entered service in the late 1990s. It is not a particularly advanced platform by the standards of Russian Kilo-class submarines or Swedish Gotland-class boats. It does not use advanced air-independent propulsion. It runs on a conventional diesel-electric cycle, which means it must snorkel to recharge batteries every day or two, at which point its radar signature and diesel exhaust become detectable. The Song-class crew held contact on the Kitty Hawk strike group for 6 days. During that window, the submarine would have needed to snorkel at least twice, possibly 3 times, raising a mast above the surface in the proximity of a carrier strike group with airborne early warning coverage, surface radar pickets, and a trailing SSN. That is the detail that changes the analysis. The Song did not just avoid passive sonar detection, it avoided active radar detection during snorkel cycles, which means either the timing of those cycles exploited radar coverage gaps, or the crew had sufficient intelligence on the strike group's patrol patterns to snorkel at predictable blind spots. Either the Song had defeated the screen deliberately, following a rehearsed approach corridor, or the strike group's passive search had a blind arc wide enough for a diesel submarine to walk through unguided. One meant a trained crew with a working plan. The other meant a patrol pattern the carrier's own helicopters could not cover. Both images were visible on the flight deck, aircraft that had flown, and a threat that had gone unfound. Obstacle 1. Here's the geometry problem that every carrier strike group commander faces, and it is built into physics rather than doctrine. A passive sonar array hears a contact based on the signal-to-noise ratio, the submarine's radiated noise versus the background noise of the ocean at that location, at that time, at that depth. In the Philippine Sea in autumn, thermal gradients create acoustic layers that can bend sound upward or downward. A submarine operating below the deep sound channel can route its noise away from surface ship sonar arrays almost entirely. A submarine operating above a thermal layer can find an acoustic shadow zone where hull-mounted sonar on destroyers is effectively blind. The strike group's towed arrays help. A towed array passive sonar system, drawn at low speed behind a surface ship, can achieve significantly better low-frequency sensitivity than a hull-mounted array because it gets the sensor away from the ship's own noise. But towed arrays impose operational constraints. They require the ship to maintain relatively steady speed and course to avoid fouling the cable. In a dynamic environment where the formation is maneuvering, towed arrays are frequently retrieved. The trailing SSN is the best answer to the quiet diesel problem, because a nuclear submarine can match the diesel's depth, its patience, and its acoustic environment. But the SSN is one asset in a large ocean. Its passive sonar coverage cone is not a sphere. There are bearings it cannot resolve, particularly when the contact is directly ahead or directly behind on the same axis, what sonar operators call the bow null and stern null. The Yuan-class crew evidently understood this geometry. They held position in a bearing sector that kept them in the carrier's baffles, the acoustic shadow directly astern of a ship where hull-mounted sonar is blind and where the trailing SSN's own sonar coverage is weakest. When the formation changed course, the submarine adjusted. It was not stationary, it was maneuvering to stay in the gap. That requires an understanding of the strike group's geometry that goes beyond opportunism. It suggests either sustained contact on the formation from a distance long enough to develop a tracking solution, or external cueing from signals intelligence, satellite reconnaissance, or surface ship observation of the group's patrol pattern before the submarine was ever in sonar range. The Song crew had studied the Seahawk search pattern. They had timed their approach to the helicopter's outbound leg, closed during the gap, and held depth while the sonar passed overhead. The maneuver showed up in the body camera footage the crew recorded inside the pressure hull, men at their stations, running a sequence they had rehearsed, a Bacacco 1 resolution. The carrier strike group's response options were constrained. Active sonar pings would have confirmed the contact, but active sonar pings also reveal the position and capability of every ship that uses them. A carrier strike group that goes active sonar broadcasts its location and tells any nearby submarine exactly where every surface ship is. Active sonar as a detection tool is a trade you find the submarine, but the submarine also finds you more precisely. In a permissive peacetime environment, that trade is acceptable. In a contested environment at the outbreak of hostilities, it is a significant tactical cost. The Seahawk held its hover sonar cable in the water, listening on passive. Going active would have put a ping on the Song and put the strike group's exact position on the Song's sonar display in the same instant. The carrier deck kept its aircraft turning, the radar kept its sweep. The passive search ran on, and the Song ran with it. The Song broke the surface on schedule, her conning tower cutting the waterline as the crew ran their post-mission systems checks. No distress signal, no emergency ascent, a controlled surfacing, on the crew's own timeline. In international waters, the strike group had been patrolling for days. The carrier deck kept operating. Helicopters landed, refueled, and lifted again over the same water. The radar scope swept the same arc. Subscribe to Blue Water for the operational picture behind the headlines. The patterns the flight deck footage shows and the briefing slides leave out. Axt 2. The proliferation problem. The 2006 incident was a single data point, but data points in strategic analysis acquire meaning from context, and the context here is the proliferation of diesel-electric submarines across the navies that the United States Navy must operate around. In 2026, the People's Liberation Army Navy operates approximately 50 diesel-electric submarines, principally Yuan-class Type 039AB boats equipped with air-independent propulsion. Air-independent propulsion eliminates the snorkel requirement entirely for extended periods, typically 2 to 3 weeks of submerged operation depending on battery capacity and crew requirements. A Yuan-class submarine running on its AIP system at 2 to 3 knots generates a radiated noise signature that approaches the acoustic floor even more closely than the Song did in 2006, and there are 50 of them. The Yuan-class also carries YJ-18 anti-ship cruise missiles launched from torpedo tubes. The YJ-18 has a reported range of roughly 540 kilometers in its rocket-boosted phase before transitioning to a terminal sprint at roughly Mach 3. A Yuan-class submarine that achieves a firing position inside a carrier strike group's screen does not need to surface to demonstrate it was there. It demonstrates that fact differently. This is the strategic context in which the 2006 incident must be read. It was not an embarrassment with a single platform from a single class. It was the proof of concept demonstration for a doctrine that has since been resourced and scaled. The carrier deck launch cycle completed. The last aircraft in the sequence rolled to the catapult and was gone, climbing into the low light over the Pacific. 7 minutes of screen time, one strike group, and a diesel submarine that none of it had detected. The Plaian submarine force had demonstrated that a diesel-electric boat with conventional propulsion and a competent crew could penetrate the screen of a carrier strike group in the Philippine Sea. Within a decade, that boat would be replaced by a quieter one, with AIP propulsion and missiles with a 540-kilometer reach. The carrier strike group doctrine had not changed fundamentally. The threat had. But here is the part the map does not show yet. The Song incident was not the first time a diesel-electric submarine penetrated a carrier strike group screen in the Indo-Pacific. It was the first time one surfaced to prove it. Designate 3. The acoustic environment and the anti-submarine warfare gap. Undersea warfare is won and lost in the acoustic environment. Unlike air combat, where radars operate on electromagnetic principles that are essentially the same for both sides, submarine detection depends on understanding the ocean's physical structure at a specific location, on a specific day, at a specific depth. No two acoustic environments are identical. The Philippine Sea in autumn is not the Yuan Strait in summer. The South China Sea presents a distinct set of acoustic challenges from the Sea of Japan. This matters because the United States Navy's anti-submarine warfare capability was calibrated against a specific acoustic environment, the North Atlantic, where doctrine and technology were developed during the Cold War to track Soviet nuclear submarines transiting from the Kola Peninsula toward the GIUK Gap. The GIUK Gap, Greenland Island, United Kingdom, was the choke point through which Soviet submarines had to transit to reach the Atlantic sea lanes. NATO built an entire detection architecture around that choke point. SOS, hydrophone arrays on the ocean floor. P-3 Orion maritime patrol aircraft saturating the coverage zone. Submarines stationed at the gap's approaches. The Indo-Pacific is not the North Atlantic. It is shallower in critical areas, thermally more complex, acoustically noisier in the shallow water approaches to the first island chain, and it does not have a single choke point that forces diesel-electric submarines into a predictable transit corridor. The shallow water acoustic environment near the Chinese coast, in the Yellow Sea, in the Taiwan Strait, and in the South China Sea actively degrades the performance of hull-mounted sonar systems designed for deep-water blue-water operations. Water depth in much of the South China Sea ranges from 50 to 200 meters in the contested shoal areas compared to 3,000 to 5,000 meters in the open Philippine Sea. In shallow water, acoustic reverberations from the bottom, thermal gradients compressed into a narrower depth range, and biological noise from marine life create a background clutter that makes diesel-electric submarine detection exponentially harder. A Yuan-class submarine operating in 100 meters of water near the Spratly Islands is not a blue water detection problem. It is a shallow water contact close to a complex bathymetric environment, operating against sonar systems that were not optimized for this environment, running on AIP propulsion that removes the snorkel requirement, and armed with missiles that do not require a close-firing solution. The carrier strike group's organic anti-submarine warfare capability, its surface ship towed arrays and hull-mounted sonar, its embarked MH-60R Seahawk helicopters with dipping sonar and sonobuoys, and its trailing SSN, must operate in this environment against a force that has spent 20 years learning its acoustic geography. What is most surprising about this capability gap is not the technology difference. The United States Navy has the most sophisticated ASW systems in the world. What is surprising is that the geography itself provides the adversary with a structural acoustic advantage that technology alone cannot fully overcome. The ocean is not a neutral medium. Near the Chinese coast, it is terrain that favors the defender.
Their opinion.
What this tells us about the current strategic moment is this. The carrier strike group, which has been the instrument of American power projection for 80 years, was designed to dominate blue water. It is being asked to operate in contested nearshore environments that its anti-submarine warfare architecture was not optimized for, against a force that has specifically built its submarine doctrine around that gap. That is not a failure of the carrier concept. It is a challenge that has been clearly identified and is being addressed through AUKUS, through new sonobuoy technology, through the P-8 Poseidon's expanded Indo-Pacific presence. But it has not been solved, and the Song-class submarine that surfaced inside the Kitty Hawk screen in 2006 is what an unsolved problem looks like in practice.
Oscar 4. The geometry of the first island chain.
The submarine penetration problem cannot be analyzed without the geography of the first island chain, because the chain defines where carrier strike groups must operate to matter strategically, and that is precisely the acoustic environment where diesel-electric submarines have the greatest advantage. The first island chain runs from Japan's Kyushu Island south through the Ryukyu Archipelago, across Taiwan, and south through the Philippines to Borneo. It is not a defensive wall. It is a geographic constraint on Chinese naval power projection. Inside the chain, the peon operates in home waters with organic shore-based air cover, sensor networks, and resupply logistics. Outside the chain, it must project force across open ocean without the same supporting architecture. For the United States, the first island chain defines the operating environment, a carrier strike group demonstrating freedom of navigation in the South China Sea or responding to a Taiwan contingency, must operate either inside or immediately adjacent to the chain. Inside the chain, it is within range of shore-based anti-ship missiles, land-based aircraft, and the shallow water submarine force. Adjacent to the chain at ranges of 200 to 500 nautical miles, it is potentially inside the engagement envelopes of DF-21D and DF-26 anti-ship ballistic missiles, which have reported ranges of 1,500 and 4,000 kilometers respectively. The carrier is not helpless in this environment. Its aircraft, operating FA-18 Super Hornets and F-35C Lightning IIs, can strike targets at 800 to 1,000 nautical miles from the carrier depending on the mission profile and aerial refueling availability. Tomahawk cruise missiles launched from surface ships and submarines can range targets at up to 1,500 nautical miles. The carrier does not need to be inside the chain to threaten targets inside it, but its deterrent signal is weakened when it cannot operate where it chooses. A carrier that stays beyond the first island chain to avoid the anti-ship ballistic missile threat sends a different message than a carrier that enters the South China Sea and operates freely. The message it sends by staying outside is precisely what the PLAN's integrated system of systems, its anti-access area denial architecture, is designed to communicate: that this space is contested, that entry has costs, and that the United States must weigh those costs against the signal it wants to send. The diesel-electric submarine is one instrument of that A2AD architecture. It is not the most capable one, and it is not the one that keeps carrier strike group commanders awake at night in isolation, but it is the one that can potentially operate inside the screen, close to the carrier, in the acoustic environment that gives it the greatest structural advantage. Put yourself in the position of the carrier strike group commander for a moment. You have been ordered into the South China Sea. Your mission is to demonstrate freedom of navigation and signal resolve to allies in the Philippines and Vietnam. You have a full strike group: the carrier, 2 Arleigh Burke destroyers, a Ticonderoga cruiser, and a Los Angeles-class SSN. Your E-2D is airborne, your helos are flying ASW patterns, your towed arrays are deployed, and somewhere in the water ahead of you, there may be a Yuan-class submarine with AIP propulsion that has been tracking you since you entered the Luzon Strait, running at 2 knots on electric motors, waiting for a firing bearing. You do not know if it is there. Your passive sonar has not detected it. Your active sonar would reveal your dispositions. Your SSN is searching, but the search area is large and the acoustic environment is difficult. This is not a hypothetical. This is the operational reality for every carrier strike group transiting through the Luzon Strait since at least 2010. The Seahawk banked low over the wake, its dunking sonar already being winched back aboard. The carrier's angled deck stretched behind it, aircraft spotted and chained, the island's superstructure rising dark against the early light. 7 minutes in, the hunt was not over. It had only just shown the strike group how little it had found. The United States has spent decades and hundreds of billions of dollars building the most capable carrier aviation force in history. The PLAN has spent a fraction of that building a submarine force specifically designed to make that force think twice before entering the waters it was designed to control. The aircraft carrier did not lose the argument. But the argument is no longer settled by the carrier's presence alone, and that was not even the real reason the Song crew surfaced in 2006. Controversial take here is the take that will draw objections: the United States Navy's public response to the 2006 Kitty Hawk incident, which downplayed the event and characterized the Song class as an older, less capable platform, was strategically counterproductive. Acknowledging the capability gap clearly and publicly in 2006 would have accelerated the investment in shallow water ASW capability that has only been urgently prioritized in the years since. The institutional incentive to protect the carrier's reputation as an invulnerable power projection instrument delayed the honest assessment that the 2006 incident demanded. The Song crew understood what they had done. American doctrine absorbed the lesson more slowly than the evidence required. Act by BB. The signal decode. The Song surfaced inside the Kitty Hawk strike group screen in October 2006, less than 5 nautical miles from the carrier. The commander of the group, Rear Admiral Andrew Wins reportedly was not notified until the submarine was on the surface. The submarine then submerged and returned to its base. No press officer stepped to a podium. No Chinese warship broadcast a signal. No aircraft climbed to an intercept. The strike group's radar screen showed open water. The song had come within torpedo range, lingered, and withdrawn, and the only proof was the position fix the crew had logged in their own records. Beijing had shown a hand without showing a face. The Americans had a gap to close and no official statement to argue against. This is information warfare at the strategic level, conducted entirely through the movement of a single submarine. The signal was not sent to the American public. It was sent to the analysts and planners inside the Pentagon who understood what the incident represented. It was sent to the commanders who would write the next generation of carrier strike group doctrine. And it was sent to the allies in the region who were watching the United States and China compete for credibility and dominance in the Indo-Pacific. One Yuan-class submarine. 6 days. No weapons fired. The message was received. The question planted at the beginning of this analysis was, why does a submarine that has successfully penetrated a carrier strike group's screen surface to prove it was there? The strategic logic is now clear. Surfacing is the signal. The penetration alone, unacknowledged, is tactical intelligence. The surfacing converts tactical intelligence into strategic communication. It says, we were here, we were not detected, and we are leaving on our terms. Here's a question for the comments. Was the Peleans' decision to surface the song a strategic masterstroke or a provocation that unnecessarily accelerated American ASW investment? Put your read in the comments. The Seahawk crews pulled back into the hangar. The sonar operators stared at screens that had shown nothing for hours. The strike group's next move was already constrained, and every officer on the carrier island knew it. The Pelean submarine doctrine since 2006 has developed along predictable lines given the lesson of that incident. If a Song class with conventional propulsion and a competent crew can penetrate a carrier strike group screen using acoustic discipline and geometric exploitation, what can a UN-class with AIP propulsion, lower noise signature, and anti-ship missiles accomplish using the same doctrine? The UN-class Type 039A entered service in 2006. The improved Type 039B entered production in the 2010s. As of 2026, the Pelean operates approximately 12 to 14 UN-class submarines, with additional boats of the improved Type 039C variant under construction at Wuhan and Jiangnan shipyards. These are not the Pelean's most capable platforms. That distinction belongs to the Type 093 nuclear-powered attack submarine. But they are the submarines that can operate in the shallow water first island chain environment with the greatest acoustic advantage. The planned submarine force layering reflects a clear strategic concept. Nuclear submarines, the Type 093 Shane class, and the forthcoming Type 095, handle blue water missions trailing U.S. carrier strike groups in the open Pacific, establishing presence in the second island chain, and serving as the SSBN escort force for the Type 094 Jin-class ballistic missile submarines. The diesel-electric force handles the contested zone, the waters inside, and immediately adjacent to the first island chain, where acoustic conditions favor them, and where carrier strike groups must operate to have strategic effect. This is a division of labor designed around the geography of the theater. The plan has not tried to build a carrier-centric navy to match the United States ship for ship. It has built a force specifically structured to impose costs on carrier operations in the waters adjacent to China, while developing its own blue water capability at a pace its economy and shipbuilding industry can sustain. The dilemma this creates for the United States is not technical, it is doctrinal and strategic. The carrier strike group is an instrument of power projection designed to be decisive. Its decisiveness depends partly on its freedom of maneuver, the ability to go where the commander chooses, when he chooses, without the threat of undetected submarines imposing constraints on that freedom. If the carrier must maneuver to reduce its submarine threat exposure, it cannot simultaneously maneuver to maximize its strike effectiveness or its visible presence for deterrence signaling. The two requirements are partially in tension. Every course change to unmask the carrier's baffles is a course change away from the optimal strike position. Every increase in speed to improve hull-mounted sonar performance generates more noise and reduces the formation's acoustic sensitivity. The quiet diesel submarine imposes these trade-offs without firing a single weapon. It constrains the carrier's operational freedom through presence alone, or through the possibility of presence, which is strategically equivalent. The flight deck crews respotted the aircraft. The carrier island's signal lights cycled. A Seahawk lifted off the deck and swung out over the water again, beginning another search leg over an ocean that had already given up nothing. 21 minutes in, the strike group was still flying the same pattern against a submarine that had already gone. The United States Navy has not ignored this problem. The response has been systematic and significant. But the gap that opened in 2006 has not closed as fast as the threat has grown. There is one capability the United States has developed specifically to address this problem that the map does not yet fully show, and it changes the calculus in ways that Beijing has been watching carefully. ALBC-SPN 6. The American response and the unresolved variables. The P-8A Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft is the most significant single platform in the American response to the quiet diesel submarine problem. It is a Boeing 737-800 derivative equipped with an acoustic sensor suite, Raytheon AN Chalbertas 137 DEVA-5 inverse synthetic aperture radar, a magnetic anomaly detector boom, and the capacity to deploy 129 sonobuoys per sortie. The P-8A can fly at 41,000 feet at 490 knots, reach an operating area 1,200 nautical miles from its base, and loiter on station for hours deploying sonobuoy fields that create acoustic barriers across suspected submarine transit routes. The P-8A has largely replaced the P-3C Orion in American maritime patrol aviation and is the primary airborne ASW platform for the Indo-Pacific. Approximately 110 P-8As have been delivered to the U.S. Navy as of 2026, with squadrons based at Naval Air Station Jacksonville, Naval Air Station Whidbey Island, and forward deployed to Kadena Air Base in Okinawa, Misawa Air Base in Japan, and periodic detachments through the Philippines under the ECA basing framework. The P-8A's sonobuoy fields can create acoustic barriers across the Luzon Strait, the Bashi Channel, and the approaches to the Miyako Strait, the primary transit routes for Pyongyang submarines moving from coastal waters to the open Pacific. This is the choke point strategy applied to the submarine problem. Instead of searching the open ocean, focus the detection capability on the geographic bottlenecks through which submarines must transit. The Luzon Strait is roughly 250 nautical miles wide between Taiwan and Luzon. The Bashi Channel, the southern portion of the Luzon Strait, narrows to approximately 120 nautical miles at its most constrained point. A P-8A deploying a sonobuoy field across this channel, combined with SOSUS equivalent bottom-mounted arrays that the United States has deployed at classified locations in the Western Pacific, creates a detection barrier that any submarine transiting from the South China Sea to the Philippine Sea must attempt to defeat. The key word is attempt. AIP propulsion submarines running at 2 to 3 knots through a well-deployed sonobuoy field are detectable, depending on the acoustic environment and the sonobuoy density. They are not invisible. The detection problem is not that these submarines are literally undetectable. It is that detecting them requires persistent wide-area coverage that strains the available P-8A force across a theater that covers millions of square nautical miles. OBS-3. The coverage problem. The Indo-Pacific theater spans roughly 38 million square nautical miles from the Strait of Hormuz to the Bering Sea. The United States must cover choke points in the Luzon Strait, the Miyako Strait, the Korea Strait, the Tsushima Strait, and the approaches to Guam. P-8A squadrons in the Pacific number approximately 60 to 70 aircraft available for operations at any given time, accounting for maintenance cycles and training requirements. Covering all critical choke points simultaneously with sufficient sonobuoy density requires either a significantly larger P-8A force or prioritization that leaves some choke points less covered than others. The P-8A submarine force, operating from bases at Qingdao, Zhoushan, and Yulin on Hainan Island, has the advantage of proximity. A Yuan-class submarine departing Yulin can reach the Bashi Channel in approximately 3 to 4 days of submerged transit. The P-8A must cover that approach zone continuously because a gap in coverage of even 24 hours provides a transit window. OBS-3 resolution. The United States has partially addressed this coverage gap through two mechanisms. First, the AUKUS submarine program commits Australia to eventually operating Virginia-class nuclear submarines, which would provide additional SSN hulls in the Indo-Pacific able to conduct barrier patrols at choke points without the P-8A's fuel and crew endurance constraints. Virginia-class submarines can maintain patrol positions at choke points for 90-plus days without surfacing. Second, Guam is being developed as an advanced submarine base capable of forward-sustaining multiple SSNs without requiring them to return to Pearl Harbor or Bremerton for servicing. The Guam buildup includes not only submarine tender infrastructure but also expanded aviation facilities at Andersen Air Force Base capable of sustaining larger P-8A detachments. Andersen sits approximately 1,500 nautical miles from the Luzon Strait, within comfortable P-8A range for extended Bashi Channel barrier operations. But AUKUS nuclear submarines are 15 years from operational deployment for Australia. Guam infrastructure takes time to build and is itself within range of P-8A Bf-26 missiles. The response is real, and it is being resourced. It is also not yet complete. Personal PA-Trace 2. The strangest part of the American ASW response to the diesel-electric proliferation problem is not the technology investment or the basing decisions. It is the doctrinal conservatism. The Carrier Strike Group formation and its ASW screen have evolved relatively slowly in the 2 decades since the Kitty Hawk incident, while the threat it faces has changed significantly. The MH-60R Seahawk helicopter, which provides the carrier's close-in ASW coverage with dipping sonar and sonobuoys, has been updated but operates on the same fundamental concept as its predecessors. The towed array systems on Arleigh Burke destroyers are improved versions of Cold War technology. The Virginia-class SSN assigned to screen the carrier is the best attack submarine in the world. But there is one Virginia-class per carrier strike group, and the Playan's Yuan-class force numbers in the dozens. The arithmetic of that comparison is one thing the performance data cannot fully capture from the outside. Naval intelligence analysts have their own assessments. The public ones suggest the gap is real, and the response is insufficient to close it at the current pace. Personal PH Race 3. One detail that stays with me from the open-source analysis of the 2006 incident is the reported distance at surfacing less than 5 nautical miles from the carrier. 5 nautical miles is 9 kilometers. A carrier moving at 15 knots covers 9 kilometers in 18 minutes. A YJ-18 missile covers that distance in under a minute at its terminal sprint speed. The Song class in 2006 did not carry YJ-18 missiles. The Yuan class in 2026 does. The geometry of what the Song crew demonstrated in 2006, translated to a Yuan class with AIP propulsion and anti-ship missiles, is a different strategic problem. Act 7. The cold strategic closed the radar scope held nothing. The sonar display held nothing. The open ocean stretched to the horizon off the carrier's bow, and somewhere beneath it the answer was already logged in a submarine's navigation record. The last 60 seconds of the search looked exactly like the first, and that was the point. The Carrier Strike Group sailed on from the Philippine Sea after October 2006. The Song-class submarine returned to its base. No weapons were fired. No official incident was declared. The strategic consequence was not measured in damage or casualties. It was measured in the doctrinal and investment debates it triggered inside the Pentagon, in the classified assessments of how often similar events had occurred without surfacing, literally and figuratively, and in the Playan's own calculation of what had been demonstrated. The carrier's power comes from presence, from the ability to go where it chooses, when it chooses, and to have that freedom of maneuver be credible. A submarine force that can reduce that freedom, even by imposing uncertainty rather than achieving kills, is a strategic asset that punches above its acquisition cost. One Yuan-class submarine, purchased and operated at a fraction of the cost of a single Arleigh Burke destroyer, potentially imposes significant operational constraints on a carrier strike group worth $25 billion in total platform value. The asymmetry is not incidental, it is the design principle. The United States retains decisive advantages in blue water operations, in long-range strike, in carrier aviation, in nuclear submarine capability, and in the global basing network that gives its forces strategic reach that the PRN cannot match. Guam sits 1,800 miles from Taiwan. Diego Garcia anchors the Indian Ocean. Yokosuka hosts the 7th Fleet's forward headquarters. These are not equivalent to anything China has positioned outside the first island chain. But the first island chain itself remains a contested acoustic environment where diesel-electric submarines, proliferating across PNN inventory with AIP propulsion and anti-ship missiles, have structural advantages that have not been fully negated by American ASW investment. One choke point remains whose acoustic control is genuinely unresolved: the Bashi Channel, southern passage of the Luzon Strait, 120 nautical miles wide at its narrowest, connecting the South China Sea to the Philippine Sea. It is the transit route for Playan submarines moving from Hainan to the open Pacific, and in a Taiwan contingency scenario, the passage through which carrier strike groups must transit moving from the Philippine Sea toward the strait. Controlling the acoustic picture in the Bashi Channel is a requirement for both sides in any Taiwan scenario. The United States has investment there. The PNN has practice there. Neither side has publicly demonstrated that it owns that acoustic environment. One rival countermove has not yet been answered. The Type 039C Yuan-class variant reportedly under development with improved AIP endurance of up to 30 days submerged, which would eliminate the snorkel cycle vulnerability that provides the most reliable detection opportunity against current AIP submarine. If that capability matures and enters service in the numbers current Chinese shipbuilding rates suggest, the acoustic detection problem becomes significantly harder. One alliance commitment remains deliberately ambiguous. AUKUS's submarine component promises nuclear-powered submarines to Australia, but does not specify when Australian crews will be operating those boats independently, what operational area they will be assigned to cover, and under what command authority they will function in a contingency. That ambiguity is partly diplomatic, partly an honest acknowledgement that the timeline is long. It leaves a coverage gap in the southern approaches to the first island chain that has not been filled by any currently available alternative. Comment here with what you think is the single most important unresolved variable in the Indo-Pacific submarine balance. The answers tend to sort themselves into two camps, and the divide is instructive. The board in 2026 is not the same board as 2006. Both sides have invested, both sides have improved, and the geography has not moved. A carrier strike group operating in the Philippine Sea today has better sonobuoys, better dipping sonar on its MH-60R helicopters, P-8A coverage from Cadena in the Philippines, a Virginia-class SSN, and accumulated doctrine from 2 decades of contested operations in this theater. It is also operating against a planned submarine force that has doubled in size since 2006, shifted from conventional to AIP propulsion across its diesel-electric inventory, equipped itself with missiles that do not require firing inside the carrier's screen, and has spent 20 years studying the acoustic geometry of the first island chain. The board favors the United States today in the open Pacific. Inside the first island chain, the geometry is contested, and the carrier that operates in contested geometry sends a different message than the carrier that operates freely. The Yuan-class submarine surfaced inside the Kitty Hawk screen in 2006 to send a message without a press release. The message was, "This gap exists, we know it exists, and we have the patience and the discipline to exploit it." 20 years later, that gap has not closed. It has changed shape. The carriers are still sailing, the submarines are still listening, and the Bashi Channel is still 120 nautical miles wide. If the geometry of contested seas interests you, subscribe to Blue Water.
Next on the board, why the United States is positioning attack submarines at a base that officially does not host them, and what that tells you about the next phase of the Pacific competition.
The carrier deck kept launching aircraft. The radar operators kept sweeping their scopes. The helicopters kept flying their search patterns. None of it had found the song sitting at firing depth, undetected, inside the screen. The crew that controls the water beneath the fleet controls the fleet.